2025, the Coast Guard cutter James seized nearly $500 million in drugs during a single 112-day mission. This 418-foot vessel operates like a floating military base, working around the clock to hunt drug smugglers. But how does one ship track submarines specifically designed to be invisible? And why would cartels spend millions building vessels that might end up at the bottom of the ocean? Join us as we look into how the United States military sabotaged drug submarine operations at sea. The cartels have changed how they move drugs. They no longer use fast boats racing on water. Now they use homemade submarines that travel underwater. These submarines can go thousands of miles under the sea and can carry drugs worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Colombian drug groups tried using basic underwater tubes pulled by fishing boats. These simple devices were often caught by military patrols, so they learned and got better. By the 1990s, they were building powered submarines in secret places deep in the jungle. Trees hid these workshops from planes and satellites. These submarines were built from homemade boats with everyday materials like fiberglass and wood. Workers learned how to build them through trial and error. The jungle workshops became their factories where the cartel showed they could match technology with hard work and drug money. Today's drug submarines show the building skills despite being made by people who never studied submarine design. These boats are about 80 feet long and can carry up to 10 tons of drugs across 2,500 miles of ocean without more fuel. The submarines stay mostly underwater, only coming up briefly at night for fresh air. This helps them avoid Coast Guard and Navy ships looking on the water's surface. Each sub has 5 crew members who spend weeks at sea in very hard conditions. The space is so small that they can barely stand up. It gets very hot inside, and the crew members eat little food and drink little water. Aside from this, the air is stale, and the workers often describe the experience as being stuck in a hot, damp closet. Their makeshift submarines work so well that they have become the main way to move large drug shipments across oceans. Law officers find it hard to keep up as the designs and routes keep changing. Military forces have caught some of them and learned their secrets, but for each one they catch, several more finish their trips and deliver drugs to waiting buyers. The cartels spend between $1 and $2 million to build each submarine, which sounds like a fortune until people realize that a single successful trip can deliver drugs worth over $150 million. The math makes sense for traffickers who see these vessels as investments that pay off 75 times over, even though getting caught means decades in prison and the loss of everything they have built. These newer submarines blend into the ocean with blue and gray paint jobs that match the water around them, and their smooth shapes cut through waves without creating the white foam trails that patrol boats look for. The most sophisticated models even have lead lining installed inside their hulls, which blocks the heat from engines and crew members, so thermal cameras on military aircraft and drones can't pick up their heat signatures from above. The biggest problem for law enforcement comes from the built-in self-destruct system, which includes valves that flood the vessel and sink it within minutes when crews face capture. When patrol boats get too close, the crew opens these valves and the submarine fills with water and drops straight to the ocean floor, taking millions of dollars in drugs with it. The ocean depths where these submarines sink can reach thousands of feet, and finding them becomes like searching for a single car at the bottom of a lake the size of Texas. Recovery teams rarely find these sunken submarines, which means the evidence disappears forever along with any chance of tracking where the drugs came from. Operation Orion in 2024 shocked military officials when they intercepted a submarine that had traveled over 10,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean, heading for Australia. This submarine had covered a distance equal to driving from New York to Los Angeles more than 3 times without stopping, proving that cartels could now reach markets on the opposite side of the planet. The operation changed everything because it showed that drug submarines weren't just moving along familiar coastlines anymore, but opening new routes that law enforcement had never imagined possible. Military forces realized that any coastline in the world could become a destination for these underwater smugglers. The fight between cartels and military forces has become a fight where each side tries to outsmart the other with better equipment and smarter tactics. Law enforcement now uses thermal cameras that detect tiny temperature changes in the water, drones that patrol hundreds of square miles of ocean, and artificial intelligence that analyzes wave patterns to spot hidden submarines. These detection systems work like security cameras that can pick out one suspicious person in a stadium full of thousands of people, but they still miss most submarines crossing the ocean. Military experts admit they only catch about one submarine for every 3 or 4 that complete their trip successfully, which means billions of dollars in drugs reach American streets despite all the technology trying to stop them. The problem grew too big for America to handle alone, so 14 countries came together in January 2012 to launch Operation Martillo, which means hammer in Spanish. Countries including the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Spain, Guatemala, and Honduras created the biggest joint effort ever to stop drug trafficking at sea. Smugglers who tried switching routes after hearing about drug busts often sailed right into another country's patrol zone without knowing it, and the international cooperation meant there was nowhere left to hide. Every arrested crew member and seized submarine revealed more information about how trafficking networks operated, making cocaine harder to find and more expensive on American streets. Cartels responded by building a fleet that rivals some small countries' naval forces, using 2 main types of vessels that each serve different purposes. Their speedboats, called go-fasts, are 30 feet long and powered by 3 or 4 outboard motors that each produce 250 horsepower, like attaching several sports car engines to one small boat. These boats reach speeds over 80 miles per hour and carry 2,000 gallons of fuel, enough to travel 500 miles without stopping, which gets them from Colombia to Jamaica or from the Bahamas to Florida. The boats sit low in the water and are painted blue to blend with the ocean, usually carrying just one person to leave more room for drugs and fuel. In early 2025, one Coast Guard ship caused so much damage to cartel operations that traffickers still talk about it secretly. The United States Coast Guard cutter James completed a 112-day mission that cost trafficking groups nearly $500 million and threw their entire system into chaos. This 418-foot Legend-class cutter works like a floating military base with 150 crew members working around the clock to hunt drug smugglers. The ship can stay at sea for months without docking, following trafficking routes across the ocean without giving smugglers any chance to rest or regroup. During those 4 months, the Endurance Patrol vessel captured more than 48,000 pounds of illegal drugs, enough to supply a mid-sized American city for an entire year. The total street value reached $510 million, making it one of the biggest financial hits ever dealt to drug cartels in a single mission. On January 5th, the crew used a special drone that can fly for 18 hours straight and has cameras powerful enough to read a boat's signature from miles away. The drone followed a suspicious vessel near Ecuador until a boarding team moved in and caught 3 smugglers with 2,250 pounds of cocaine. The next day got even worse for traffickers when patrol aircraft spotted 3 go-fast boats traveling together, which smugglers rarely do because it attracts attention. Helicopter teams stopped all 3 boats at once, catching 9 people and seizing 14,000 pounds of cocaine in one coordinated strike. When smugglers tried using a low-profile boat designed to avoid radar on January 7th, Coast Guard snipers shot out the engines without hurting anyone and stopped another 8,000 pounds of cocaine. On January 18th, smugglers threw their cargo overboard to escape, but the cutter James crew chased the fleeing boat while other members collected the floating packages, recovering 6,000 pounds of cocaine from the water. In Key West, Florida, there's a building that looks completely ordinary from the outside, but houses one of the most powerful drug-fighting operations in the world. The Interagency Task Force South brings together experts from the military, FBI, CIA, Coast Guard, and Customs to coordinate America's war on drugs at sea. Inside the command center, giant screens show maps of the Caribbean and Pacific Oceans, with colored dots marking every boat, plane, and submarine in real time. Analysts watch these screens 24 hours a day, looking for anything suspicious that might indicate drug smuggling. When they spot something unusual, they immediately send out ships, planes, or helicopters that are already positioned and ready to intercept. The task force uses special Coast Guard teams called law enforcement detachments placed on Navy warships, which solves a legal problem since military crews can't arrest civilians, but Coast Guard officers can. Navy ships, such as the USS Gridley, use powerful radar that detects small boats from over 100 miles away, while Coast Guard teams undertake the hazardous task of boarding suspicious vessels and making arrests. The command center utilizes years of data and advanced computers to predict where smugglers will next, creating heat maps that indicate the most likely routes, allowing forces to be positioned before smugglers even depart South America. The United States cutter carries technology that smugglers can't beat, including drones that stay in the air for 18 hours and have cameras that can read numbers on a boat from 5 miles away. The radar on the patrol vessel picks up objects as small as a basketball from 20 miles away, which means even a tiny periscope from a drug submarine shows up on the operator's screens. The crew includes helicopter pilots who fly low over the water, snipers who can shoot out a boat's engine without hurting anyone, and boarding teams who jump onto moving boats in rough seas. Drug submarines are hard to find because they travel just below the surface with only a small pipe sticking up for air, and they're painted blue-gray to match the ocean. The patrol vessel uses several methods at once to find these hidden vessels, starting with radar operators who watch their screens for anything that looks out of place. When they spot something suspicious, like a small object moving in a straight line where no boat should be, they mark its location and start tracking it. The crew then launches a Scan Eagle drone that flies to the target area while staying high enough that people below can't see or hear it. The drone has special cameras that see heat, and submarine engines give off heat that shows up like a bright line in the cold ocean water. Even when the submarine is completely underwater, the warm water from its exhaust creates a trail that the drone can follow, and the submarine crew never knows they're being watched from above. On January 7, 2025, the United States patrol vessel tracked one of these submarines for 8 hours before making its move. The submarine was a low-profile vessel designed to sit so close to the water that waves washed over it constantly, making it almost invisible to regular patrols. The drone followed it all day, sending video back to the ship, where analysts figured out its speed and direction, and when the submarine came up for air that night, the ship was waiting just over the horizon. When this patrol ship finds a drug submarine, catching it becomes dangerous because the crews on these narco submarines will do anything to avoid prison. They usually install special valves that flood the vessel in minutes, and when submarine crews see the Coast Guard coming, they would open these valves and sink their ships along with millions of dollars in drugs. The United States ship has to move fast, sending helicopters ahead while it races to catch up. The helicopters fly in low with snipers ready to shoot out the submarine's engines if it tries to run, while speakers tell the crew to stop in Spanish and English. Most submarine crews give up when they see helicopters overhead and a warship coming at them. On January 18th, one submarine crew threw packages of cocaine overboard while trying to escape, but the patrol vessel sent fast boats to collect the floating drugs, while other boats chased the submarine until its crew finally surrendered. The boarding teams wear special gear and carry weapons, but their main job is to get on the submarine fast and secure the valves before anyone can sink it. They climb onto wet, slippery decks while the narcotic submarine rocks in the waves, and they have to search cramped spaces where desperate smugglers might be hiding. Inside these submarines, the temperature often reaches over 100 degrees, and the air smells like diesel fuel and sweat from crews who have been at sea for weeks. The cutter James did something amazing in just 1 month. It destroyed drug operations that took criminals years to set up. The drug smugglers could not understand how one ship kept catching them. On January 5th, the ship caught a boat carrying over 2,200 pounds of cocaine near Ecuador. They found it by following it with a drone for hours. The next day, they stopped 3 fast boats traveling together and took 14,000 pounds of cocaine. This was strange because drug smugglers usually don't travel in groups. On January 7th, they caught a small submarine with 8,000 pounds of drugs. On January 18th, they recovered 6,000 pounds of drugs that smugglers had thrown into the water. The ship didn't just take drugs off the water, but also gathered information that helped catch more smugglers later. Every person they arrested knew something about the operation, like where submarines get built, who pays for them, and what routes they plan to use next. The computers and phones found on these vessels contained contacts, maps, and messages that revealed entire smuggling networks. The success hit the Sinaloa and Jalisco new generation cartels especially hard because they lost submarines that cost millions to build and took months to prepare. The cartels keep improving their submarines to avoid ships like the James Cutter, adding lead lining to block heat signatures and using new materials that don't show up on radar. Some new submarines can dive deeper and stay underwater longer, while others are built to look like fishing boats on the surface, but have hidden compartments underneath. The smugglers started using encrypted radios that change frequencies every few seconds, making it impossible for the Coast Guard to listen to their conversations. The James Cutter responds with new technology of its own, including artificial intelligence that analyzes wave patterns to spot submarines and satellites that track vessels from space. The ship now works with Navy submarines that can follow drug subs underwater, where surface ships can't go, and new drones can drop sonar buoys that listen for submarine engines. The Coast Guard also started using special boats that can match the speed of go-fast boats, which can reach 80 miles per hour on calm seas. When the James Cutter catches a submarine, the real work begins because the crew has to document everything for court cases that might take years. They photograph every part of the submarine, weigh and test all the drugs, and interview everyone on board through translators. The submarines get towed to port, where experts take them apart to learn how they were built and look for new features that might show up on future vessels. The cocaine gets destroyed in special incinerators while prosecutors build cases against the smugglers and anyone who helped them. The crew members from drug submarines usually face 10 to 20 years in federal prison, but they're often just hired hands who know little about the overall operation. The submarine builders and cartel leaders stay hidden in South America, already working on the next submarine, while the James Cutter heads back to sea. For every submarine the ship catches, experts believe 3 or 4 others complete their trip successfully, which means the hunt never really ends. The vessel proved that one ship with the right technology and crew can disrupt billion-dollar criminal operations, but it also showed how far cartels will go to move drugs across the ocean. While the ship's 112-day mission in 2025 was a massive success, everyone knows the cartels are already planning their response, building better submarines and finding new routes. The Cutter James keeps hunting because stopping even one submarine means keeping tons of drugs off American streets, and that makes every dangerous boarding and long day at sea worth it. As drug cartels continue to build more sophisticated submarines, the Coast Guard and military forces keep developing better ways to find them. While the James Cutter's 112-day mission in 2025 dealt a massive blow worth $500 million, everyone knows the cartels are already planning their response, building better submarines and finding new routes. Thanks for watching. While you are still here, click on the link on your screen to check out another of our videos. See you there.